Well, hello all, and welcome to a very exciting Civilizations in Review. We missed you all last week, but there's so many more empires to talk about. So thank you all for being here. We're here with Omo Waleao from Nigeria, calling in about the Chaldean Empire, and our wonderful fellow content writer, Paula. Her extraordinary moderation skills is why I asked her to be on tonight. So I'm very excited to jump into this empire. A lot of really interesting things, and just thank you again so much for writing it. I'll throw it to Paula to read the 101 word intro.
All righty, without further ado, between 1940 to 8, from 1940, I cannot speak today. Between 940 to 855 BCE, a Semitic-speaking tribe migrated to the southern Mesopotamian region in what is now known as modern Iraq, and for the first time in history, established a kingdom called Chaldea. The kingdom of Chaldea was an ancient land in southern Babylonia on the Persian Gulf near the delta of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Chaldeans are associated with Babylon because they settled near Babylon and in Shinar. Chaldean people were engaged in a tussle for domination with the Assyrian Empire for about 232 years. The Chaldeans are famous for their knowledge in writing, mathematics, and astronomy. Wow.
Incredible start. Let's begin with my favorite question, which is why did you choose this empire? What spoke to you about the Chaldeans? What were you interested in about it?
Okay, I really don't know anything about it. So when I was going through the civilizations, Chaldea stood out to me because I've seen it in the Bible. So I thought, oh, this will be cool. I would love to know more about that empire. And that was why I chose it.
So it should come as no surprise for those who know me. I am studying diplomacy and international studies and everything right now. And so the first thing I honed in on when you're in your writings was about how the Chaldeans were the history's biggest opportunists and most brilliant diplomats. And I found that incredibly interesting. So if you could elaborate a little bit more on what your favorite aspects of that were, that would be amazing.
Okay. I found it interesting that they were called history's biggest opportunities, mostly because they kept this power tussle between them and the Assyrians. And so they kept taking back the power. Anytime there was a distraction, they took back power. But it wasn't through a war, but it was always some distraction. Maybe a king was sick, and then they took back the power. And so it kept going. And they were called big to place themselves in an alliance with the Elamites, which helped them to take back the power because they didn't have full warfare to actually fight the war. But by getting into an alliance with the Elamites, they were able to take back the power. And it was really interesting getting to know that about them.
Fascinating. Yeah, a lot of these empires are quite opportunist in the land grabbing and whatnot, but to be called history's greatest is a wonderful title, or maybe not so much, but a really fascinating one nonetheless. Thank you for sharing that background. I find that really fascinating too, as a fellow diplomacy studies person. I'm really interested in your last sentence of your intro. They're famous for their writing, mathematics, and astronomy. Can you talk more about sort of the knowledge and contributions to academia that they are well known for?
Okay. I think they contributed to the legal codes with Amunabi, I think. But I think it's Amunubi. So it contributed to the legal codes, and that actually contributed to the writings that we have now. And they also had a very interesting trade system because they were at the border of the Mesopotamia. So they kept trading with this trade barter with the others, but they had to sign legal documents going on today in the way we sign documents. Now in astronomy, they were known to, they watched the stars, they really enjoyed looking into the stars and trying to find out what exactly was there. And so they kept trying to know more. Even I think in one of their people, a Chaldean prince, discovered the sundials that we still use today. That was also something that they contributed to astronomy. Yeah. And so that trickled down to the zodiac signs that we still use today. And I think, okay, then mathematics. I think they also contributed some of because of their love for science, they were really interested in numbers too. And so those numbers actually even still being used today. And in people who study mathematics still study some of the things that they actually started and build on it.
Yeah, I was actually very interested, and I laughed as I was reading it. The fact that we can thank the Chaldeans for the fact that there's 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. And we can also thank them for the fact that our weeks are 7 days long. That was really interesting. And then, of course, the law code that you mentioned, I learned it in community college at like a world civilizations history course. So it was very Americanized. So I just now learned how to properly say it. The Americanized version I learned was Hammurabi.
Oh.
But yeah, no, it was funny. One thing I really wanted to highlight, just because of my love for archaeology and history, is you mentioned the centerpiece that is showcased at the Berlin Pergamon Museum, which I believe is also a picture of one of the mosaics, or part of that centerpiece is also the main thing that you see when you click on the Chaldean website or page. So for those who finally look at it, you'll know where it originates from. But if you could describe it a little bit, or what you learned from it, because I love learning about stuff like this as well.
Oh, the Ishtar Gate. That was constructed by Nebuchadnezzar II. And he created it. It was the sixth gate that he created when he was expanding the empire. And it became so popular that it was even seen as at the beginning, as one of the 7 wonders of the world, until it was destroyed. And so I found it interesting that some people saw it and thought, wow, this is great. Museum in Berlin. So that was interesting. I think.
Yeah, when a lot of people think of Babylonia, one of the first things I think about is this Ishtar Gate. It's so iconic, and yet it's not. I mean, it is the geographic area of Babylon, but it's really the Chaldean Empire, which I find so fascinating, and I mean, absolutely stunning. It is the main image of the Chaldean Empire because it's one of the first, most recognizable aspects to this empire. I thought until really reading this that it was just extended Babylonia, but it's its own community. That still exists today. It is a religious minority now in modern Iraq, the Chaldean community. So though there still is a connection point, that, thank you for mentioning that in your writing. I didn't realize that either, which is really fascinating. The aspects of modern influence. The skate lovely, are weak in time, great, but also this community of those still practicing the religious and cultural communities of 2,000 years prior. So fascinating to me. I'm really interested by these rivals. Obviously, opportunist sort of is included in that sentence. But there was the Elamite, the Assyrian, the Persian. I mean, they're in the midst of all of these mega ancient empires. Talk a little bit about their connection, their place in that space, and more cool things you learned about the Chaldeans.
Okay, yeah, I think what I really found was more of their part also with the Assyrians, but also they had some other relationship with the others, the Syrians, in their trade. and the Elamites in their diplomacy. And so in those ways, they connected with those around them. But it was really interesting the way they took the power. In one instance, I'm not good with names, but for one of those kids was really, he had to, his wife was sick, and then he had to go to war. So he went to war. By then, so they saw that was a weak point in his life because he was at war and his wife was sick. And at that exact moment, they actually collaborated with the Elamites, another king. I'm not good with names, that king. And so they actually collaborated with him. And before he could come back, they are taking the power. And in a night, another person was ruling. I found it interesting because, I mean, if I was living then, you were sleeping this night with one empire, and the next day, there was another empire. That was really interesting.
I completely understand the feeling of not being good with names. My empire was also a very long-lived empire and had so many different kings. And what made it even harder was some of the kings were like the same name, just different number. And even with the notes I had in front of me, I was just like, it was one king. I don't remember which one. So I get it. One thing I also wanted to touch upon and hear your thoughts about was the geographic location of the Chaldean Empire, because it's located in Mesopotamia near the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, which for many lovers of history, this is a significant region, and it always plays a significant role in whatever power emerges and develops in that region. So I would love to hear about what insights or interesting things you found out about that as you were researching.
The geography. I wish I could say I found something. I did. I discovered that he was there, and because I'd read about that river, I think in the Bible. So I thought, wow, this is cool. And so I had to include it in my writing. I have to say I'm not good with history. So this was a bit challenging for me. But I enjoyed the story because I love stories. And so that made it fun. But the historical part, the names, the numbers,
Well, you'll find this funny enough.
that's a bit tough for me.
I studied both history and political science in undergrad. So I'm a huge history nerd, but I'm horrible when it comes to remembering names and exact dates. And it's because I approached history from the standpoint that you just described, as stories, interesting individuals that overcome circumstances. And in this case, we have the Chaldean Empire and the circumstances in which they emerged. So I also looked at it as a story. So I love hearing somebody else also mentioning, I enjoy stories, because that's how we learn. Before we had written history, we had oral history. It was all about telling stories and engaging people. So I love the piece you did. It was amazing.
Thank you.
And what I love about this piece too is it's written as if it was an oral story. Nothing against any of the rest of our empires; they're all different writers, purposely so. But some of them are a bit more academic on this happened this day, this was great, which is awesome. Yours has this like flow to it of this community, this engagement, this person. I don't know. I just appreciate that style of writing as well. So thank you for embedding that already in the great work you do and all the ones to come. I'm excited to see the future stuff that you put together. There are so many cool pieces of the Chaldeans, though. Not only the time and astronomy and math and trade, the Ishtar Gate and the modern communities that exist, but on top of all of those pieces, I think the part that is really fascinating is that they also had pyramids of kind called a ziggurat. Can you tell us more about like their architecture or what those buildings were for, or things of those nature?
The ziggurat, I think that was also constructed by Nebuchadnezzar.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think he was still, when he was expanding the empire before he got to Jerusalem and Judah, he actually built it to, I guess, to make himself feel better. But he just really wanted to make the place look majestic. And so he actually constructed this pyramid so people could come to look at it. And he actually gave them a name. He gave the Chaldeans a name. I think that was why he was known as the most influential king of the Chaldeans, and he's the one everyone remembers. So I think that is all I can say about it.
Well, it's interesting. You could always go kind of in length about how throughout history different civilizations have been remembered or not remembered by what they built and what they left behind. Because yes, writings can sometimes be found, but for example, in the case of the civilization I wrote about, they didn't really leave writings themselves, but those writings about them that were more found. But when it comes to building, my civilization had a temple that everybody recognized easily. Your civilization has one of the used to be 7 wonders of the world. And then of course, their own type of pyramids, which my ADHD and history loving mind wants to also point out that many different civilizations across the world created their own versions of pyramids as well. One thing I did want to touch upon, because it is a critical question that always leads to a very interesting conversation, is what did you find was the hardest thing to like research? Because I know when we do our writings for these Civilizations 101s, we have like several different topics that we have to at least touch upon. For me, it was finding the modern influence of my civilization. It was hard to kind of find that tie. So I wanted to know what was the hardest for you?
Yeah, I think it was the government, I think. Yeah, I think that was it, because it had, like I said, I'm not good with names and numbers, so it had such a long list, and I had to keep reading and reading and reading to get it and be able to incorporate it into my work, especially with the 101 words. So I had to do a lot of snipping. that was a bit challenging, but at least I got through it.
Congratulations. Yeah, that's it's a great, it's the reason each of our content writers start with this project. A, because we want this library. B, because it is the same for every single writer, so we know what is harder for some is easier for others, but there's those pieces. But also sort of the sense of I am now adding to the global conversation on the Chaldeans. So again, thank you for taking this on. Very fascinating empire. A lot of really, really cool pieces here, and I'm just so grateful that you joined the team and made one less empire to write about. So I appreciate it. As we sort of start to wrap up here, any final pieces of info or cool stories or whatnot that you want to share in researching the Chaldeans?
Oh, I forgot to mention this about the ziggurats. I think, okay, so when I was researching, I noticed that it said it's actually related to the Tower of Babel in the Bible, that pyramid that was actually constructed by Nebuchadnezzar was really high. And so it was actually what was named the Tower of Babel. I found that interesting because I never thought about that. I didn't know the Chaldeans actually did that and built the Tower of Babel. I thought it was someone else. So that was interesting to find out about the secret. And I think everyone will actually enjoy learning about that.
I know that's incredibly interesting, and you're reminding me about what a horrible Catholic I am. I now definitely need to go back and reread and restudy the things that I kind of thought I'd left behind, because my history nerd side really was just like, I find this really interesting. And then hearing from you all these different ties with the Bible it's really interesting. It's especially because I know I have like multiple copies, because being, again, a history nerd, I know that different editions have different things that they highlight and other things that they edit out. So definitely need to at least visit one of those copies.
Well, excellent. There's so many more pieces to read, and I like to save it for our audience to actually go to our website and engage with it. There's a lot of cool pieces here, all of the other rival empires have already been written about as well. So you can have this conversation of everything happening in the 900s BCE. A lot of things went down during those centuries. So a lot to read about. Thank you again so much for writing it. Thank you, Paula, for your wonderful questions. A lot of really, really cool, fascinating pieces here. And I'm just so grateful to have this wonderful verbal aspect of this great historical story. So thank you again for writing. For all, please check it out on our website, alfusaic.net. That's ALFUSAIC.net, and then go to the Chaldean Empire. Thanks all so much.